Sometimes been brought here when they were very young and have made it their home. Today, my guest is Jonathan Gonzalez Cruz. He was born in Mexico, moved to the US when he was 4. He recently graduated from Southern Connecticut, where he was awarded a presidential scholarship. He is currently vice president of the Greater New Haven Young Democrats and student leader of the CT Students for a Dream, an organization that advocates the rights of undocumented students. Most recently, Jonathan was instrumental in passing a Connecticut bill that allows undocumented students to apply for institutional aid. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
Can we start by talking a little bit about the bill I just mentioned? It allows undocumented students to apply for institutional aid. Talk us through what that was like. How many years in the making was that? And then what was it like before the bill passed? And what does it mean now?
Certainly. So back before the bill was passed, one of the issues that was facing the undocumented community here in Connecticut was that students had to pay completely out of pocket when it comes to paying their in-state tuition. And because of that, many people found it very difficult to attend college. And so the idea at Connecticut Students for a Dream, we convened our membership and we said, what is the issue that is affecting you the most? And that was the number one. So then we decided to organize ourselves around that in order to make higher education more accessible. And through that, and then ended up happening that the way we wanted to accomplish that was opening up eligibility to institutional aid. And what is institutional aid? So when you pay your tuition money to a university, that institution sets aside 50%, 15%, and then provides it back in the form of need to students who demonstrate that need. And the issue was that even though as students we were paying into this pool of money, because of our status, we weren't eligible to apply for it and then also receive need. So it was very unfair. And we had fought for 6 years through the state legislature in order to finally get that passed. And I'm very proud to say that last year in 2018, we were able to pass it with bipartisan support. And Governor Malloy signed it within a week of it passing both state chambers of the legislature.
How incredible. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
amazing. And why do you think it took so long? Why 2018? Why, given our current political climate, why do you think it was able to pass finally?
I'll answer the question of why it took so long, and I'll summarize in one word: politics. It all came down to politics, and especially when the House was evenly divided in the Senate with 18 Democrats and 18 Republicans, and then also when the House had a very slim Democratic majority, it was very challenging to go to the more conservative legislators and then advocate for it, because among their constituents, they viewed it as a bill that would take away taxpayer money and then fund undocumented immigrants' education. And despite us telling them, like, no, this isn't taxpayer funded at all, it's actually our money that's going into this pool of money, it was very hard, like, getting that through to people. And so a lot of the times people from those conservative regions of Connecticut, they had issue with aligning with us, even though we presented the facts as they were. But luckily last year we were able to work together with both Democrats and Republicans, and then we agreed that education is important and we should open up this institutional aid to undocumented immigrants as well.
It's amazing. What an amazing story and what an amazing accomplishment. Do you feel like, have you been able to see the difference already? I mean, so tell us a little bit about when this will be fully enacted, and then how has, your community of students and friends reacted to this?
So right now it is actually going to be, so it has an effective start date of January 2020.
Okay.
So this year is more of the year where students are going to be able to apply into it, and then once they do, and then they're going to receive the actual aid next January. The reaction among us, I was one of the people who was in the House gallery and then the Senate gallery when everything was being voted on, and it was so scary, but also so like an adrenaline rush once we actually did pass the Senate, because we passed it with a 30 to 5 yay nay vote. So it was like a huge margin. And then in the House, we also passed it by a good amount too. So everyone was happy. Everyone was crying tears of joy. And then at the governor signing, it personally hit me that this is an actual law that is in Connecticut. And I think what's even more powerful about it is that as undocumented advocates, we can vote, yet we were still able to pass a law that is now existing in Connecticut. And that just goes to show the power that our community has here.
That's incredible. And you know, I have really learned from my students. I taught high school in New York for a long time, and now I teach at Gateway in Southern here. And I have really learned from my students that sometimes when they find out their immigration status, you know, and it happens anytime. I think that parents sometimes reveal to their children something that they were unaware of before, that they may be undocumented or they may not have been aware of their immigration status. They really experience a depression, and I've seen so many of my students lose hope, lose interest in their academic pursuits. Sometimes they drop out of high school. And I can imagine that even sort of looking forward, there was always this question, well, so what? Now what? You know? So something like this I can imagine is going to make a huge difference. Like you said, just removing one more of those many barriers that it seems that, you know, undocumented students have to higher education. Can you talk a little bit about your own experience when you tell us a little bit about when you learned of your own immigration status here and what that made you feel like at that time, how old you were, and what it meant for you in the future?
Yeah, certainly. So I was born just outside of Mexico City in Mexico. And I married here to the United States with my parents when I was roughly 4 years old. So initially we were living in San Diego, California for I want to say 4 months before we ended up moving to Connecticut because that's where my father already had siblings here. So I actually always knew that I was undocumented. It was one of those things that it you know that you are, but it's not really like it doesn't really hit you until certain events happen that make you realize, oh, I actually truly am undocumented. So I want to say that growing up, like I could never talk about my status. I always had to keep what like my family very secretive because should I ever like talked about us, then that could put us in jeopardy. So when I was in high school, when everyone started to apply to get their driver's license and then they were considering college, that is where it started, where it hit me that I couldn't really like those two things were more um difficult for me to get just because by nature of my status. And so that's where it began. But the event that actually made me realize that um the event that really affected me, given my status, was when I was 16 years old and I had just come home from school. I received a phone call from my mom, and she said that my dad had been pulled over for a minor traffic violation, and right now he was being held up at the police station. And me being very naive at the time, I thought, okay, like if it's just a minor traffic violation, then he should be able to come home for dinner. But then I had to go to the police station. And as I walk in the lobby and I see my mom with tears running down her face, and she says the words, they called ICE on him, he's being deported, my heart immediately sank because at that moment, w- I knew it was a likelihood that it would happen, but because being Connecticut and we're such a progressive state compared to others, I didn't think it was going to happen to my family until it did. And so I very vividly remember sitting at the police station, and it was me and my older brother. We were in the lobby, and they had allowed my mom to go into the room that they were holding my dad. And the thing that still dawns on me today, whenever I think about it, is how they were, and by they I mean like the officers who detained my father, how they are able to watch two of his kids sitting right there in the lobby, and knowing that the man that they called ICE on is going to be deported, and yet still not have the humanity and decency to say, hey, do you want to go say goodbye to your father or have any last words with him before he's deported? And that moment is one of the ones that I it just it shows me what we're up against, because it kind of reminds me that a lot of people here who don't want undocumented immigrants in the country, they don't view us as children. They don't view us as, people who are about to be separated from their family. They only view us as the fact that we don't have a piece of paper that says we're allowed to be here. And so after that day, um, I went even more into hiding regarding my status, because if it happened to my dad, then it could certainly happen to me. It could happen to any other of my family members. So leading up to um, the 2016 elections, and I started witnessing all of Donald Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric and the plans that he was proposing. I once again I thought, oh, like, he is crazy. There's no way that people are going to vote for him, and Hillary Clinton is going to win, and everything's going to be fine.
I think we
And
all thought that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I wish she did win.
Right.
But unfortunately she did not. So I remember waking up that next morning, and realizing that Trump had won. And I very vividly remember thinking about my own experience, witnessing my dad's deportation. And then I thought back to the many children that I volunteer with, either as a catechist teacher or during like the summer camps through my church. And I personally knew that a lot of them and their families were undocumented. And that's when it hit me even more that what happened to my family is even more probable now that Donald Trump got elected as president. And so I had a little bit of a moment where I thought, okay, right now there are two paths laying in front of me. I could either once again go even further into the shadows, or I could actually take I could actually advocate for the undocumented community and then help protect those families so that they don't experience what I experienced. And so I chose the latter, because thinking back on like all the children that I work with, I never want any one of them to experience what it's like to be separated from your family members. And so quickly became involved with Connecticut Students for a Dream. And as you mentioned earlier, Connecticut Students for a Dream, we're a statewide organization that's youth led, undocumented led, and we advocate for the rights of immigrants and their families.
Wow, Jonathan, what an incredible story. How moving. And so am I right to understand that you didn't have a chance to even say goodbye then to your father?
No,
Okay.
I did not. I and because last year, with everything that happened with the family separations, I I think it pushed me even further to actually like do the work that I do, because for me, I yes, I even though I was a teenager, I was 16 years old. But then when I think about the children who are barely old enough to walk, barely old enough to feed themselves, like, they are so incredibly young. They're babies. And yet we have here not only a president who was supporting like that and locking children and separating them, but also an institution, ICE, that is able to do that. That they do not view them as families seeking, a better future for their children. They view them as criminals. They label them as terrorists, as gang members, and as I cannot stand that. I cannot stand people who are actively searching for families to separate and who are locking them up. And their job is literally to make sure that they're still in their cages. And I kind of do want to share also another. It's not my own personal story, but I did work with this student, and she actually was in one of those detention centers. But because she spoke English, she would tell me how those agents in there, they would make fun of the children in English because they knew that they couldn't understand them. They would eat in front of them, knowing that those children weren't being very well fed, and all the abuses that you don't hear of. They're happening, and even as you and I are speaking right now, they're occurring right now. And that's why for me personally, I I do know that I am going to dedicate my life to helping eradicate all those, um like everything that's happening right now, because immigrants need to be treated fairly. They need to be treated for what they are, and that's humans. And until that happens, then my job won't end, because I want to be that voice to advocate for those that can't advocate for themselves right now.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to remind you that you're listening to Crossing Borders with your host, Anjali Wasson, on WNHH Radio. We're broadcast at 103.5 FM and live streamed on the New Haven Independence website, Facebook Live, and Twitter. Um, Jonathan, I have a quote from Trump here who says, and I'm quoting, "We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them, but we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people, these are animals," he said. Um, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for your family and for your mother after your father was deported? And, you know, as you said, the rhetoric around anti immigration starting to kind of invade the airwaves and the media. And what did it feel like for your family in particular after having experienced this heart wrenching loss and then to hear all of this anti immigration rhetoric floating around? How did it feel for you and your mother and your brother?
Um, so I will be completely honest. Whenever I think about the time shortly after my dad was deported, there there was so much. I don't know what the word is for it, but um I essentially almost I feel like I blocked it out, like that initial period without him, because I could remember leading up to the day and then actually knowing that he was deported, and then but like shortly after that, it's almost like if my brain doesn't want to think about that moment. And I say this because whenever I do think about it, I it's almost like it's not there. It's almost like my brain is trying to like not let me access it, which I know it sounds weird, but
Oh no, I think
um
it makes a lot of sense. It was so traumatic that your
yeah,
body actually just wants you to forget about it. Otherwise, how
yeah,
do you go on?
yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I could certainly say how it affected me,
Mhm.
because I can't speak for my mom and my brother, but
Mhm.
for me, I know that I do have a lot of anxiety when it comes to when it comes to thinking about my father. There are many nights where I actually do have nightmares that he is deported again, or that he like something happens to him, and then I wake up in like night sweats and everything. So that family separation has cost me, like has personally cost me separation anxiety, not only from him but also like my family members. And regarding like the rhetoric that Trump is using right now, I I uh, I I don't know how to explain it, but I I see what he is trying to do, and what he is trying to do is he is trying to dehumanize undocumented immigrants. Because if you dehumanize undocumented immigrants, you are able to then lock children up in cages because they're not humans. You are able to separate them from their families because they're considered criminals. You are able to do so many things to them because, in the public's eye, or at least your base, they won't view them as people, they will view them as humans. And so, whenever Donald Trump does speak very negative about undocumented immigrants and tries to dehumanize them, um, I know what he is trying to accomplish. And as an advocate for the undocumented community, it is like mine and others' responsibility to speak out against that, because that is exactly why he was able to do all the things that he did and all the things that he is currently doing. Um, so when he was tear gassing people at the border is because his base didn't view people crossing with their children; they viewed them as animals.
Mhm. So he uses it to serve his political agenda, like you said,
Yes.
and win favor with his base once again. And um, what do you think this means for the immigrant community that's already here? And what do you think it means for people who are still separated from their families and perhaps want to join their mother and father who are already here? Or what do you think it means? What does this do for our sense of fear and insecurity? And as you said, living in the shadows, as undocumented communities do, with the fear always hanging over them that
Yeah.
perhaps, you know, in your own personal experience, a minor traffic violation will lead to a deportation.
Yeah.
What does it do to us now? Do we continue to live in fear and actually feel more fear, or are people starting to rally together and kind of fight against this? What are you seeing in terms of your work in New Haven?
So when it comes to the question of what does this mean for undocumented immigrants, and like in a sense, like what should the immigrant community do, um, I actually want to answer that by kind of um, by saying this as an undocumented community, like within my like me as an undocumented immigrant, um, and then the rest of the undocumented community. Yes, it is our responsibility to speak out against everything that is happening, but it's even more so the responsibility of actual U.S. citizens who are currently here because the for lack of a better word, like the backlash that they would face is even less so than that of an undocumented person speaking out against it. Because I, for myself, like if I spoke out against, well, I do speak out against a lot, but because of that, I know I'm making myself a target to ICE, or I know that my advocacy work is making me a target for potentially being deported because I'm being so vocal about it. So I personally face the risk of deportation, whereas a citizen, um, you won't face that deportation. You won't face any detention that comes with speaking out against what's happening. So I actually want to say that it is more so the responsibility for people with citizen privilege to use that privilege and use it to protect the undocumented immigrant community. We shouldn't place what's happening and then making it the sole responsibility of undocumented immigrants or the immigrant community in general to speak out against it. It's actually more so those with citizen status because once again they won't face deportation.
They're certainly not as vulnerable, like you said, and that it's a shared responsibility too.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to remember, that this
Yeah.
is something that affects all of us. Our political climate is a reflection of who we are. And tell us a little bit about the DACA program and what that means. And if you could just give our listeners a little background on what DACA stands for and what it means, and then we can talk a little bit about how you feel that's under threat.
Yeah. So DACA, it stands for Deferred Action for Late Childhood Arrivals, and it was an executive order implemented by then President Barack Obama. And I just want to give a little bit of a context with what happened because a lot of people like to credit President Obama for establishing the program, um, but in reality, and this is how I have personally heard how it happened through the immigrant community, is that leading up, it originally when Barack Obama ran for president, he had promised to help with immigration reform, and he had promised to help the immigrant community. But within his first term as president, he didn't really do much. In fact, he actually was deporting more people than ever before. So come his reelection, and he hadn't done anything. And back when I believe it was Mitt Romney running against him, um, certain immigration groups, because they hadn't seen um, President Obama doing much, um, they were actually meeting with Mitt Romney to see what were his ideas. So then the people on President Obama's administration were like, wait, why are you meeting with Republicans? They're not the ones who are going to help you. So then the response was, okay, but neither was Barack Obama. So you have to, if you have to give us something.
Mm-hmm.
So then out of that, DACA was created because that's how President Obama didn't think of DACA on his own. Immigrant organizations actually were the ones who advocated for it, and they were the ones who were helping to establish it. So I just want to give credit where credit's due.
Absolutely.
And it's important to understand it because um, both Democrats and Republicans they deport undocumented immigrants. Like my father was deported under the Obama administration. So I just want to mention that piece of it. Um, so then in 2012, when Barack Obama did sign the executive order, it essentially allowed individuals like me who met the criteria of it to apply for it. And we received a social security number and a work authorization card. So we were able to legally work. And we also received in quote unquote protection from deportation. And I say quote unquote because in reality, we didn't have an actual legal status here, but we were also without any sort of protection. So we could still be deported, but we like the only thing that we could do now is like legally work.
Okay.
Um, so when it came to DACA, it did help 800,000 individuals. But then come President Trump, back in I think it was 2017 in September, um, Attorney General then Attorney General Sessions said that it was going to be eliminated. So then where are we right now with DACA?
Mm-hmm.
Even though DACA is still, once again, quote unquote, alive, because of the injunctions that are happening in court. And just to explain further about that is that when they were trying to end the DACA program, certain courts were like, no, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to keep some of it intact. So right now it is in a very legally
Mm-hmm.
like weird place because
Ambiguous place.
yeah,
Yeah.
because some courts are saying no, you can't end it. Some of them are saying no, DACA wasn't even legal to begin with. So it's most likely going to go to the Supreme Court. But for right now, because of the injunctions, it does have to stand as is. Um, but in general, DACA was never meant to be a permanent solution, just a temporary one.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever people ask me like, or people say like, we have to save DACA, DACA's already dead. We have to think about actual immigration reform and more specifically the Dream Act. Um, and with me personally, I actually just submitted my DACA in January, and last week I did receive the notification that says that USCIS received my application. So right now, what it means for me is if something should happen where DACA ends, then I won't be able to continue my graduate assistantship at UConn, because that's where I'm studying, and I won't be able to legally work anymore because I would then my work authorization permit would expire, and that's what I need when I apply for a job. And even more so towards the future, it would mean that I would have received a BA in economics and math, and then come December a master's in economics, um, and I would have these degrees, and I wouldn't be able to apply them at all. So it is a very very scary place for me right now. Because I can't plan out my future
Mm-hmm.
like other people who are in my program. I can't say, oh, after I graduate this December, I'm going to work in this place or that place, because in reality, I don't even know if I'm going to be here. And it wasn't until DACA was ending and then watching the administration lock up children and tear gas them at the border that I thought to myself, wow, like even though I have DACA, like that stuff could still happen to me, and it could still happen to me in Connecticut too. My dad was deported, and that could happen to me. So it is a very frightening, uncertain time,
Mm-hmm.
not just for me, but all of us who have DACA, and also those who um, weren't even able to qualify. And I just want to like expand a little bit more on the qualifications. They're actually very abstract because one of them is like you would have had to come before June 15th of, I want to say 2007. So if you qualified for everything else, like let's say you and I were applying for DACA together,
Yeah.
and I came in June 14th and you came in June 16th, even though we had the similar identical application, but because of that one abstract date, I will qualify, but then you wouldn't. So, and and that is what happened with a lot of people. They, because of that abstractness of the dates,
Yeah.
um some people were able to qualify and some people weren't. So I
Just
just
by arriving on a different
yeah,
side of that line.
yes.
Oh. Wow.
So that is why we do need to push for immigration overhaul, and one that is fair and humane, not one that the administration is proposing, because yesterday he said that more border patrol agents should be placed at the border and more immigration officers should be hired. But in reality, what that does is it's terrorizing the immigrant community, because if you're not even able to um, bring your child to school without fear of deportation, you're terrorizing that family. And that's what's happening here in Connecticut. That's what's happening in your neighborhoods and to your friends and your coworkers that you might not even know that is happening to them.
So the future sounds very uncertain, and just to go back to what you were saying about, sometimes under even, a liberal government like we had with Obama, that we saw more deportations than we had seen in the previous presidency, and that difference between the Republicans and the Democrats doesn't always exist in terms of immigration issues, as you said. But it does feel like we're seeing something completely new with President Trump. And he, and as you said, his mega policing of the border and of the immigrant community in general. Border crossings, as they report in the media again, and let's talk about also what we can believe in the media. And it sounds like we can't always believe everything we hear, but that they are at an all-time low. Do you think that people's that the view and perspective of the US outside of the country is dramatically changing, and that people don't want to come here anymore because of the fear and insecurity here?
Um, I actually am not able to thoroughly answer that question as someone who is actually on the inside. Because I know when my own family came, because it was around the year 2000, um, like we had still viewed the United States as a place where, um, it does provide many more opportunities, and that's why my family migrated here because they viewed it as a place where their sons would be able to have a brighter future. But I I wouldn't be able to out because I'm within the country and I have like our what's it called that um I don't know how to word it, but I I wouldn't be able to answer that
Mm-hmm.
question because I'm not outside of the country.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
our own perspective as someone inside.
Do you have a strong tie with Mexico still? Do you feel are you in touch with do you still have family back home? Are you still in touch with
Mhm.
the Mexican community at home or
So it's kind of funny to answer that question because yes, by birthplace I am Mexican. My entire family is in Mexico, with the exception of my immediate family here.
Mhm.
But when people ask me where I'm from, I say Connecticut. So then when they say no, but where are you from, I have to say I'm from Mexico. But in reality, I this year I have been living in Connecticut for 19 years. This is where I learned to ride a bike. I learned to drive a car. I graduated my university. I got my first job. Everything that I have done throughout my most formative years has been here in Connecticut. And whenever I do travel outside, for like for work or I go to DC or anywhere else, I always proudly say like I'm from Connecticut. We're a small state with a big heart. So I always advocate Connecticut because I love it so much. Um, so even though by birthplace I am from Mexico, I do consider myself a true um, Connecticut. I don't know. I don't want to say nutmegger,
I
but I,
never know what to
I
say.
don't either.
Connecticutan?
Yeah,
Yes,
a
right, right.
Connecticut. Like I am from Connecticut.
Yes.
This is my home, and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. I want to go back to that question, but where are you from? That sort of added layer after you've, explained that you're from a certain place, New Haven or Connecticut. I get that a lot, and I think that, my accent sometimes throws off people because it sounds a little bit American, but it sounds a little bit British, and it's actually a very colonial accent. A lot of people that have similar immigration stories to me speak the way that I do, which is that I was born in Kenya. And I lived there for 13 years. And then I moved to England with my family, and I lived there for a very long time. And then found my way to the States eventually. But I think that question about, well, where are you really from is so haunting
Yeah.
because I think it bespeaks this idea that we don't necessarily accept that this is a truly multicultural society
Mhm.
and that there are many people with different stories of how they've arrived here and how they relate to this place as their home.
Yeah.
Um, so Connecticut is home for you now. And where do you see, I know it sounds like the immediate future in terms of waiting for your immigration status to come back from UCIS. Where do you see yourself going? I know you do a lot of work with. Um, tell us a little bit about your work with the Greater New Haven Young Democrats, and tell us a little bit also about the Connecticut Students for a Dream. In terms of your work with those two organizations, tell us what the future holds and what do you campaigning for now and advocating for now?
Certainly. So in general, my work with politics is I help like advocate for more progressive officials, and that means like I want to say like a very great example of one is none other than like Alexandria Ocasio.
Oh,
She is
yeah.
just so like amazing,
She is amazing.
and everything she does. I follow her on like Instagram, and every time she posts, I'm like, that's like I agree with everything you're saying right
It's
now.
like the opposite reaction when I
Yeah,
watch Trump.
yeah,
I'm just like,
exactly.
I cringe inside when
Yeah,
he talks, but when she talks, I just have this
I have
huge
to
grin on my
applaud.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Applauding in my living room. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to see more of more people with like her who support abolishing ICE, and then also and getting rid of an institution that um in a sense is like so happily like locking up and separating families. But that's more of like the political aspect of it. But then when it comes to my work at Connecticut Students for a Dream, right now, because we were able to pass our institutional aid bill last year, and then thinking about the future, we thought, what are the needs of our communities? What are the needs of our memberships? And in addition to pursuing a higher education, one of the other ones is healthcare access.
Mm.
So we're all familiar with the fact that in this country the healthcare system is just a complete mess, and the fact that people can't afford the premiums or the copays or whatever it may be, it's very unaffordable. Um, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to equalize access to health insurance for undocumented immigrants as well. Because right now the issue is that um, it is very like it is so increasingly challenged for an undocumented immigrant to access health insurance. And right now there are really only two primary ways that I personally at least see. One is if you go to university and then you could opt into the health insurance plan that they offer. But
Okay.
as an undocumented immigrant, you're already paying $10,000 in state tuition out of pocket because you can't apply to any federal state aid, and the institutional aid hasn't kicked in yet until next
Right.
year. And the health insurance at universities are so extremely unaffordable. I think it's like $3,000 a year, which breaks down to
Mm.
$400 a month,
Mm.
and that's just unaffordable in general. And then the other way is if your employer offers it, which sounds like it's something that should be prevalent, but in reality, not every employer does offer it. And also because of your undocumented status, not everyone is able to get a job that they would be able to get it through. And in reality, like the people who may be able to get health insurance through their employer are the ones with DACA, and that's just such a limited pool too. So what we're advocating for is to allow undocumented immigrants to purchase what's it called health insurance and not be discriminated against. And right now our we haven't worked out the details, which is why I'm trying not to stray too much into them. But in general, the idea that we would like to see happen here in Connecticut is that as an undocumented individual, you are able to not only purchase a health insurance plan, but also be able to afford it. Because we know that if we just open up um, private health insurance, it not a lot of people are still going to be able to buy them because of the cost. So we really want to push for something that is fair and affordable, and that everyone can access it regardless of your immigration status.
That's fantastic, Jonathan. Please come back on the show and tell us
Yeah,
how that'll be going.
really.
And congratulations again on all your achievements. It's been really wonderful to talk with you, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me
Um,
here.
all right, you were listening to Crossing Borders with your host Anjali Wasson on WNHH Radio. We're broadcast at 103.5 FM and live streamed on the New Haven Independence website, Facebook Live, and Twitter. Please join me in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
balila dugu fini dugu gette malaro imalo ila saya saya foni te balila yake ba mi walela ali yake ba mi ma lansana kuluma aguza ile minyara bade marula kanya terilula kanyi kanu telula kanya fudu yulula yimalo nyake bajone wani ikira balapini jigile di ameriki jamana kanya yimalo erpeze jamalu belarila yusu konne lanila zaki kuruma lanila